You know, the moon has secrets. Big ones. Written right there on its surface are these strange, ghostly patterns that have had scientists scratching their heads for decades. They look like these delicate brushstrokes, almost like tattoos on the ancient gray skin of the moon. But here's the thing, they aren't painted, and they're not craters. So what are they? All right, let's dive into this cosmic detective story.
Just look at this. This feature, it's called Rainer Gamma, and it's one of the most famous examples. It's this beautiful, swirling pattern of bright material that stretches for miles, but it has no height, no depth. It is completely flat. For years, the question has been pretty simple, but really profound. What in the world could possibly create this?
So, to kick off our investigation, we've got to know exactly what we're looking at. Scientists have a name for them, lunar swirls. And they are, honestly, one of the strangest things in our entire solar system.
So what is a lunar swirl? Well, the official definition calls them enigmatic, high albedo features with a sinuous shape. Okay, let's break that down. High albedo just means they're super bright, they reflect a lot of sunlight. And sinuous, that means they've got these intricate, winding, almost snake-like curves. They seriously look like someone just painted them right on top of everything else. Craters, plains, you name it.
But this is where the clues start to get really weird and kind of contradict each other. See, the moon's surface is always getting hit by solar wind and tiny micrometeorites. It's a process called space weathering, and it basically darkens the soil over time. But these swirls, they look fresh, like they're brand new, which we know they can't be. And like we said, they have no topography. You could drive a rover straight over one and you wouldn't feel a thing. This isn't a mountain or a valley, it's more like a surface stain, a ghostly tattoo with zero physical depth.
Just when it seems like none of the clues make any sense, investigators found one that changed everything. And it's a clue you can't even see.
And here it is, the big plot twist. Every single swirl ever discovered is located inside what's called a magnetic anomaly, basically a little localized bubble of magnetism right there on the lunar surface. It's a perfect one-to-one match. Where you find a swirl, you find a magnetic field. This is not a coincidence. This is the smoking gun.
But wait, that just opens up a whole new mystery, right? I mean, Earth has a global magnetic field generated by its molten core, but the moon doesn't. Its core cooled off ages ago. So where are these little magnetic pockets coming from? Well, they're areas of leftover or fossil magnetism that's literally locked into the crust. They're like ghosts of a magnetic field that doesn't exist anymore. How they got there is a whole other puzzle, but their link to the swirls, that's our most important clue by far.
Okay, so we've got our clues laid out. A bright, flat, winding stain that lines up perfectly with a magnetic field. With that evidence, the scientific community has come up with three leading theories, or, as we're going to call them, our three prime suspects.
Let's look at the lineup. First up is the comet impact model. The idea here is that a comet smacked into the moon. The impact's gas and dust would act like a giant sandblaster, scouring away the dark topsoil and revealing the bright stuff underneath. All that intense heat would have also magnetized the ground. Suspect number 2 is solar wind shielding. In this scenario, the magnetic bubble acts like a little umbrella, deflecting the solar wind particles that would normally darken the surface. So the swirl isn't actually new material, it's just old material that's been protected from getting a cosmic suntan. And our third suspect, dust transport. This model suggests that tiny, bright dust particles can get electrostatically charged and literally float, getting sorted and arranged by the local magnetic fields into these beautiful, delicate patterns.
3 suspects, 3 totally different methods. To figure out who's responsible, we need to follow the evidence. For decades, this was a total cold case. But then, we sent a fleet of robotic detectives into orbit around the moon.
Yeah, missions like NASA's Clementine and Luna Prospector, and later the amazing Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, they started mapping these things in incredible detail. They looked at what they were made of, their magnetic strength, and how they interact with the space environment around them. Suddenly, the case was blown wide open.
And pretty quickly, the data started pointing fingers. The evidence gathered from orbit, well, it started poking some serious holes in the comet impact theory. The numbers just didn't really add up. But on the other hand, data from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter gave some really strong support for the solar wind shielding model. It could actually see that the magnetic field was in fact deflecting charged particles from the sun, just like the theory said it should. Our second suspect was looking more and more guilty.
Then came another crucial piece of evidence, this time from an instrument on India's Chandrayaan-1 orbiter.
Here's the deal. When solar wind hits the lunar surface, it helps create a molecule called hydroxide. So if that magnetic field is blocking the solar wind, you'd expect to find less hydroxide in the bright swirls. And guess what? That is exactly what the orbiter found. This was a huge checkmark for the solar wind shielding model.
So it seems like the case is almost closed, right? All the evidence from orbit is pointing to the solar wind shielding model. But to be absolutely sure, to get that final conviction, you have to do more than just watch from afar. Because really, data from orbit can only tell you so much. To truly understand the fine details of the surface, the texture of the soil, the exact brightness of the grains, you need to send a detective right to the surface. You've got to go to the scene of the crime.
And that detective, it has a name. Lunar Vertex. It's a small rover, about the size of a toaster, that NASA is planning to send to the most famous swirl of them all, Reiner Gamma, to finally crack this case once and for all.
So what's the game plan? Well, the mission is pretty straightforward. First, it's going to land right in the middle of the Reiner Gamma swirl. Second, its instruments, including a pretty slick multispectral microscope, will analyze the soil particles up close, measuring their brightness and texture in a way you just can't from orbit. Finally, it'll send that ground truth data to its lander, which will then beam the definitive answer back to us here on Earth.
So after decades of us just speculating from way up here, we are finally sending a detective to the scene of the crime to actually touch one of these ghostly tattoos. Will this tiny rover have the final word on what created the moon's most beautiful and mysterious features? We're just going to have to wait and see.